Budgeting in the real world is about moving away from textbooks and ideal best practice models to understand the reality of decision making, of politics around raising revenues and allocating expenditure to government programs. It's about understanding that messiness, that complexity. It's also about issues of credibility, whether the budget on paper, what's written down in a budget document announced in Parliament, actually materialises. Lastly, budgeting in the real world speaks to the issue of capacity constraints, especially in low income and developing countries. In many of those contexts, there simply isn't the capacity, the human resources, the organisational structure available to support the sort of sophisticated and complex reforms often promoted externally. The real world applies literally a reality check to that and asks what sort of reforms are fit for purpose, what's feasible, what sort of changes are necessary in order to get the development results that are highest priority for a country. Two messages stood out for me from the 2 days of the Cape Conference. The first was the balance between muddling through and having a blueprint up front, having a vision for what we want to achieve. We heard from people like Luisa Diogo, former Minister of Finance and Prime Minister of Mozambique, who talked about the reality of trying to muddle through, to build capacity as you go along and to spot political windows of opportunity. We also heard from people like Matt Andrews talking about some of the latest theories, some of the latest evidence on better approaches to budget reform. In the middle, we had Tim Williamson talking about how to work as an advisor to navigate this course, to provide the sort of assistance as a trusted advisor to reform-oriented government officials. His approach for me brought in some of the principles and the thinking associated with this new theory of muddling through, but he was also clear that you need some technical tools to help you implement that. A second debate that recurred through the conference was the question of indices or indicators, metrics for measuring the quality and the performance of budgeting and public finance systems. For much of the last decade, the public expenditure and financial accountability methodology and framework has dominated that discussion. There were some questions about whether, in addition to that, we need indicators that measure the relevance and the contribution of PFM to the particular development results we're concerned about, not just the formal systems on paper, but how those really translate into the sort of results that we're interested in. There are two major areas of work that we'll be concentrating on in CAPE and Centre for Aid and Public Expenditure. The first concerns the capability of ministries of finance. We focused for a long time on capacity, on human resource capacity. We don't know enough about the broader questions of organisational and institutional capability. What does it take for a Ministry of Finance to deliver against its purpose, deliver against its objectives? The second big priority for us coming out of the conference is to investigate further the relationship between budgets and public finance system and development outcomes, particularly sort of development results that we're concerned about. Those could be service delivery, they could be state building, state effectiveness, it could be to do with accountability. We heard presentations from, for example, Alan Schick, who raised the question of whether you really need performance-based budgeting in order to drive results. But we didn't hear as much as I'd expected about the real linkages and the relationships between the budget, the public finance system, and results, despite the billing of the title. I think that needs further work, some further research, and we're looking forward to taking up that challenge over the coming months.